3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sister Docs Exhale. This is one of 6 episodes in this season brought to you by these sisters here. Please introduce yourselves.
How you doing? I'm Dr. Lyrical Tay. My focus is faculty diversity and diversity in higher education.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cupid. My focus is on Black women in higher education, particularly mentoring and sister circles.
And I am Tahira Madi, also known as Dr. 99, and my specialty is community psychology. We are members of a sister circle that was formed while we were earning our PhDs, and we went through a lot, as Black women often do, in their educational and professional journeys. So in these episodes, we'll talk about our experiences, we'll relate our research to everyday life, and we'll cover a range of topics, but also exhale. Sisters, exhale. We got a lot going on. But today's episode is about the cookout. So that mythological, abstract community gathering that is happening in the collective Black imagination. So sisters, what do you know about the cookout? Like, what is the cookout?
The cookout is where we can relax, relate, and release, where we can be authentic, where we can tell some jokes, where we can eat some good food and experience community.
I think the cookout also represents a space of freedom. Right now within the US is a reminder that we are still not fully free. So the cookout provides us a space to imagine and practice what Black freedom looks like for us.
Oh, I really like those answers. So let's frame it in terms of community, because you did use that term. So when I say the term community or other people say that, what does that mean to you? And the reason I wanted you to have a pencil and piece of paper is to write it down separately and then compare your answers after you've written it down.
How many answers you want us to write?
Oh, no, just, I just want to know what the definition is. So you ready, Dr. Cupid?
Sure, I can go. So for me, community, I did look at, I guess the base word within it, which is unity. So a sense of oneness and togetherness, even within diversity. We know that there's diversity within Blackness. So this allows us a space to belong, a sense of community. It also is built upon common interests and ideas. So for me, this is what community means.
Word.
Okay.
Yes, I had likewise togetherness, understanding, a shared understanding, reinforcements, acceptance, and that home feeling.
Okay, I'm writing this down as just saying it. Shared home feeling. Okay. So I want to talk about this in terms of the cookout, though. So notice when these definitions that we talked about, when we said community, we said togetherness. A lot of people use the word shared. I wrote down people who feel a sense of togetherness and commonalities. Dr. Cupid talked about a home feeling. So what else do we have in common with these definitions of community?
Acceptance.
Acceptance, okay. Anything else? So the one thing I want to point out is how ideal it all sounds. Like when we talk about community, we make this ideal, people are sharing, people are together, people feel at home. And most people, when you ask them about community, so in my research, in my work, and there's also other research that talks about asking people from different backgrounds and different groups about community, what they mean, most of their answers, even if they differ a little bit, they still fall along the same types of themes. You can even divide them up by the same basic themes. And mostly the researchers, it's researchers and academics who don't agree on what a community is or how to study it. And in that, there are a lot of contradictions. So that's where my research leads, is how we conceptualize community, what that means to us, and all the contradictions that come with that, and all the different communities that we belong to, and how we see each of those communities differently. So in this cookout metaphor, I think, did you bring that up in your metaphor? So it kind of sounds like that. So what happens at the cookout? How does that compare to your definition of community?
Well, community can have, a bit of friction, because there's family there, and there can be friction in the homes. So a cookout has activity, it has music, it has spades and other card games. It has boisterous conversations. It also has stories from what happened back in the day, and that sort of thing. And back in the day, badminton, and all that stuff, the backyard games. So even within the friction, and especially if people get to telling on business and whatnot, then you still experience that, because you're like, oh, here go Aunt so-and-so again, she about to start. But you still, it's known, and it's comforting in that being knownness.
Right. I think similar to Dr. Lyrical Tay, who mentioned that there can be conflict or friction. That's why I said that there is diversity within Blackness. We're all not the same. We all don't have the same ideals or interests. However, we do have a shared understanding of what it means to be Black. So at the cookouts, in relation to community, is the understanding that both friction and happiness can exist. But I think our overall goal is for us to be in a celebratory space.
I like that too. So think about like the food, the fun. You can bring your friends. You might meet new people. A lot of times at a cookout, some family or a group of friends has taken responsibility for securing and preparing the food or the logistics of it all. BYOB, they may bring you drinks. Somebody might be asked to pick up ice. But a lot of times, what is important is when somebody tells you to just bring yourself. Like a lot of us just show up to the cookout. Sometimes, and that's not good in some people's homes, but have you ever been to a cookout and you're told just bring yourself? And I'm thinking about that as a metaphor with the Black community. I mean, one of you did talk about the home feeling. So at the core of experience in the world as a Black person, what does that mean to just bring yourself? Especially in sometimes, we've had an episode on masking, about imposter syndrome, about how we're always bringing something to our professions, to our communities, to our families. And at the same time, knowing that in some spaces, just bringing ourselves is enough. So I wanted to ask you, when is it enough to just bring yourself? In what settings, in what situations?
That's a question that caused me to exhale, because I think as Black women, we're trained to always bring something in addition to ourselves. So Black women are often viewed as the community caretakers for the Black community. So we can't just bring ourselves, and often in most cases. So whether or not we're bringing something physical, whether or not we're bringing something spiritual, or both, we're always feel as though we have to bring something, right? So I honestly don't know if there's a space that exists for Black women where we can just bring ourselves, because we have been so ingrained to show up for other people, right? So even within just bringing yourself, can you really just bring yourself? I'm not too sure of that, right? I can come whole, but I know that I still have to bring something to this gathering, right? So if it's not something spiritual, it's my energy. Like I want to make sure that I'm bringing a positive energy. I want to make sure that I'm bringing an affirming energy, because oftentimes as Black folks and Black women, we're not affirmed. So I want my cookouts to be a healing space. So that means that I have to be intentional about what I'm bringing to the cookout.
I'm often organizing gatherings and different things in my family circle. So I bring myself in a whole lot of stuff. But in terms of when I go to other people's cookout, when I said just bring yourself, that's just like a woosah moment. But you've been, told it's impolite to show up without anything. So I'm still like, I'm bringing some cookies, I'm bringing something, just so I don't show up empty-handed. But I do like that question, because there are friends who handle every aspect, from the food to the drinks, and they just want your company. They just want you as you are, whatever that you is. It's like, bring that. That's who we're looking for. And I definitely appreciate those spaces and those cookouts. And I've been there, because it takes that burden of planning off of you, the responsibility of thinking about X, Y, and Z. Wait, is so-and-so allergic to nuts? Let me get X, just all this other extra stuff you're thinking about to accommodate for other people. And it's like, if it's just you showing up, you're like, oh, we just can come, just be there. That's definitely a good feeling. Just bring Tay. All right, then.
And Dr. Cupid, it's just really that really struck me what you said about as Black women being trained to always bring something and be the caretakers of everybody else. So how does that fit in with your idealized definition of community, you know, with good feelings or oneness, togetherness? Does it, I don't want to say mess with it at all? Do you just accept that as, oh, well, this is just what I have to do in order to feel one with people, or that they're not going to feel one with you unless you're bringing something extra that's more than just yourself?
Yeah, so that's an interesting reflection question. When Dr. Lyrical Tay was saying she has a wusa when folks tell her to just bring herself because she knows that she can just come as her. But I think even with someone granting us that request to just bring ourselves, it allows us to be more whole in that space, right? So be more positive. So even with that invitation to just bring yourself, we're allowed to bring something more or be more conscious of not having to bring a thing, right? So in response to connecting that to my ideal definition of community and being a Black woman, when we are allowed to just bring ourselves or be cognizant that we don't have to bring something, I think then it allows us to be more intentional about bringing our energies to the space, right? So in regards to pushing back against having to be the caretakers in this ideal community, I would say it's not like it's not an either or, but it's a both, right? So as Black women, we have to prepare our children, our nieces, our nephews for this world that they are living in and the potential world of tomorrow, because you want to feel as though you're protecting them, you're preparing them, right? So it's a question of like, how do I balance raising up children in innocence? We often talk about this, right? So within that ideal community as a Black woman, it's that balancing act of how can I maintain that innocence within this space? And how can I also be real with the realities that exist? So it's always that balancing that we're having to do. So I don't necessarily know if I'm necessarily pushing back against it, but I'm recognizing that children should be allowed to be children, and Black women should allow to be fully human. So I think it's that ongoing conversation that I'm having with myself in regards to the cookout and the ideal community.
Thank you for that.
And just want to add too, I think another reason why we always feel like we want to bring something to the cookout is because it's our spirit of collaboration and knowing that other people have expended resources. And so since we're taking away from their resources, we want to add back, because even when I don't necessarily sometimes bring something, I do feel the urge to be like, let me slide you a little something, because I know that, no, like seriously, especially depending on the situation. Like if you go to a family member, you know, like that they could, you know, use and to be this gracious, you're like, oh, here, let me go ahead and slide you a little something, because you're just being thoughtful of their situation and also thankful. But for the person hosting the cookout, you know, that's a feeling of love and creating, you know, community and all of that. So for them, although they are expending energy, resources, it's like, but I got y'all. So we're getting paid in your presence, you know, in all of your presence. So it's that give and take that's awesome. And to think about too is like we're taking care of each other in that space.
I want to bring us to still thinking about community and talk a little bit about what I study, which is community membership, and then also building on a concept that I discovered called being of the community through my own research. So I want to share a screen with you now. Okay, so sense of community is a framework. So we all know what we're talking about when we say sense of community. And again, like I said, academics are the ones who don't know or who don't agree on just different community definitions. But most of us know what we're talking about when we say sense of community. However, there's a whole theory and definition of this, and it contains 4 elements, and the first one is membership. So my research focuses on membership and helping people to work through what that means to them in their work with communities. So one of the definitions is the feeling of belonging or sharing a sense of personal relatedness. Another one is a feeling that one has invested part of oneself to become a member and therefore has the right to belong. So I want to point your attention to feeling that you have to invest part of yourself to become a member and having the right to belong. And it seems like to me that doesn't necessarily resonate when we talk about a Black community. And sometimes it's like a so-called Black community because, you know, so many contradictions in it anyway when we speak about community, but Black community specifically. Having the right to belong, what does that mean to you in terms of community? Does it resonate at all?
The right. I think when I often think about the term rights, I think about legalistics. So it's hard for me to separate the legal history of being Black in America. So I would say that, of course, we have the right to belong within the US. We are citizens, but the US proves us otherwise. So when we think about the definition of the community and having the right to belong, I would argue if I applied that to the Black experience, then our nation state repeatedly shows us that we're not community members. So since we are not community members within the nation state by large, our Black community allows us to imagine and live otherwise. So I don't necessarily think about legalistics when I think about the Black community. I think about a shared membership experience. I'm Black because I'm Black and that's it. Like I don't need to explain it. So I would say when I think about that in a contextual term, it does not resonate with me.
Yes, I feel like you're born into it because of, you know, as Dr. Cupid said, I'm Black and that's it. And also in terms of thinking about all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk, like presence, you know, showing up, being there, that sort of proves it as well because people can see you, you know, metaphorically they can touch you, you're there, your presence, you're known. And that is an important aspect of community because when people ain't seen you in a while, they're gonna be like, why you dip? Where you been? Like that's just absence is felt. And so I think showing up and being there is definitely important and it means a lot in terms of that, not the legal sense of it, but you know, more so just the I'm here, you see me, I'm tangible.
I'm so glad that you both put it that way. And that's what I found when I studied the go-go music cultural community was something totally different than this notion of membership as it pertains to sense of community. So having the right to belong usually means that other people don't have that right. You know, it sounds like Karen, you know what I mean? Like I have the right to do this, you can't be here. Even, you know, having to make an investment to say that you belong to something. So this sense of community framework has been criticized by feminist scholars and other scholars as being too idealistic or too utopian. They've said that it doesn't take structural inequality into account. And I counter that it actually explains it very well. Whiteness or communities of power, communities that hold power over other people, yes, you earn a right to belong to it. And I'm glad that you all brought up the fact that we're always reminded as Black people, it's not like this community that we get to say somebody has the right to belong to. We, you know, it's a marginalized community, a marginalized people, and people who are just born into it. And that's also the structure that I found with my research. So when this contradiction though, when it comes to the cookout, that metaphorical cookout, do you notice that we treat it like a membership though? Like people who's invited, who's disinvited? You can't come, this can't come, stop giving invitations. So do you feel that contradiction when people say that? How do you react when people start talking that cookout membership language, even though we just kind of went through why it doesn't necessarily apply to the Black community?
There could be levels to the cookout though. Like some people who you want to say, don't bring no mac and cheese because we know so-and-so can't do that. No, but for real, like you start giving people roles in terms of what they can do. So it's not that you can come, but if you want somebody to always bring in the drama, then you might be, you know, excused from the community because you bring so much drama and you dispel the peace of it all, you know, because if you're going to have so much friction with you that is disruptive to the entire cookout, you got to go. because we can't have it if you're there. So if you're disrupting the experience of community for the rest of us, yeah, bounce. But in terms of like membership, you might get some roles given to you based upon some abilities.
I would say in addition to that, Dr. Larry Cote, you just referenced that all skin folk and kin folk. So at the cookout, is it only a Black space becomes my question. And who are the Black folks that are not invited because they aren't kin folk, right? So when you raise the question of contradictions and the ideal community, Dr. 99, I think is the recognition that we are trying to practice what the ideal looks like, because Dr. Lerko today just said, like, some folks got to get roles. Some folks, if they bring in too much drama, then it's like, no, we don't want that here, right? So we have a right to create space and protect it. And it's not saying that we don't have drama within that space, but it's saying, like, if you don't have the philosophy or the energy for unity at the end of the day, then we don't want you here, or get it together and then you can come back. So it's not as though you're always excommunicated for all the cookouts, right? But it's kind of like, okay, well, if you're in process and going through something, this may not be the time, because we're trying to protect the space. And I think it's necessary for us as Black folks to protect our spaces.
So in protection of space, does that mean that there isn't just one? Because we're using the cookout as a metaphor, but it's easy to go back and forth between the cookouts that we know we've been to, the cookouts that we're missing right now because of the pandemic, and then this metaphorical thing that people keep being disinvited to. So what does that mean in terms of us having to bring something, having the right to belong, disinviting people and all this other stuff, you know, treating it as a membership when we said, well, you're just born into it. So is that where the joke starts? You know, all of a sudden, because it's almost like when this concept came up, everybody just kind of knew what we were talking about. There was no explanation that really had to be given. But picking this apart now because it's coming up, and then many different things are happening right now in the country as far as people showing up, people not showing up. And that's why I think it's important to explore the contradictions and the topic.
For the people who drag our people, for the people who don't want to be considered a part of the Black community, who take a lot of pot shots at the community, who demonize the community, like, I don't want them at the cookout. I don't want to hear you preaching what you assume we all are or how we all are. And I don't want to hear you talking about how we are always, especially given the time. Like, if you're someone who's constantly talking about property over people and what's going on right now, right? Like, if you're not concerned about the humanity of our brothers and sisters, and you're one of those Black folk who's talking about, well, why are we doing this? And you're talking about riots instead of uprising. Like, I don't want you there, because you're disturbing the peace. Like, you are disturbing the peace and you're not taking things into consideration. So people who get disinvited to the cookout are people who are not trying to represent and keep the peace of the cookout. Like, if you're not trying to have that togetherness, that shared understanding, then bounce. It's fine if you want to critique us, but when you blame us for systemic things, when you when you come sideways at us for things that are not our fault, when you don't take the human side, it's like, bounce. I don't want you at the cookout. You can't come.
Now, you talking about the actual physical cookout, or you talking about metaphorical cookout?
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about both. No, but for real, like, I don't want you there. I don't want you at the metaphor. If you're going to blame people and you're going to choose people over property, you can't come to none.
So this is the thing, though. Remember when you were saying,
I'm so sorry. If you choose property over people, that's what I meant to say. Because I say it right. People over property. Right. Sorry.
So remember when you were saying, though, at the cookout, with certain people, it's like, oh, there go on so-and-so again. I've always seen these people at the cookout, where it's like, some people are going to be, like you said, not necessarily disruptive, even though sometimes that can happen depending on where it is. And again, I'm going to physical cookouts then, but some of these people have always been there. Some people, it was like a table of old men or other women talking about politics. And some people are going to disagree. And while they disagree, man, y'all shut up. I'm about to go get me another plate. And they come back and sit down and might keep it going. Somebody might break it up. All right, shut up all that talk now. Let's go do something else.
But the level of disruptiveness or destruction is what it is. Because depending on the harm, if it's conversation, if it's something that, you know, we know so-and-so, but so-and-so is still down, so-and-so still shows up in different ways, so-and-so still represents. I mean, there are some things that I think in terms of community, in the name of community, we put up with. You know, like we have that cousin that might be like, oh, here they go again, and always want to talk about these gender things, and always want to, you know, rub me the wrong way, talk about where women's place, you know, are. Yeah. But at the same time, that same cousin will show up. You need to do X, Y, and Z. You need to do this. Let me show you how to do that. So it depends, because sometimes stuff is said in jest, even though it ain't funny, but they still represent in other ways. But I'm talking about people who always coming down on you, people who always coming down on the Black community, talking about how we not good for nothing, how we don't do X, Y, and Z. Like that type of disruption where they don't show up, they don't come around. It's like, well, why are you here, just to eat out good food? That's what you're here for now? Or you here to learn some things and take it back, you know, speaking metaphorically and physically. You here to learn some things and take it back so you can use it, or so you can have something else to talk about, so you can have something else that you think you have on us, right? Oh, so-and-so got in a fight. There they go again. Them Negroes over there can't do X, Y, and Z. You know, it just depends what you're doing when you're a part of the community. Because we will excommunicate your tail.
That's another contradiction about being excommunicated, right? But we can't, so our skin, when we just bring ourselves, think about what it means to just bring yourself and the police pull up behind you. I just brought myself to the hospital. So these people, I didn't have to, they're not going to ask me, do I believe in people over property? They're not going to ask me, do I know, you know, have I read James Baldwin? They're not going to ask me, to quiz me on my Black history to say that I'm Black and they're going to treat me badly. So that's what I mean about the different contradictions when it comes to community and how we see it. And when we idealize it, yes, we have just basic ways we want to treat everybody. But I don't even know if the people who got killed by police, what views they had. Maybe they had those views at one time. I don't know. But I know they're still in the community because of this different shared things that we have. But even if I'm feeling a sense of community with them, it still doesn't necessarily mean that it's this idealized version of, oh, we're feeling like one, we're so together, all this stuff. Maybe that's not how I feel a sense of community. And that's actually where my research took me. It's like, are people really feeling this in every single community that they have? And what I learned was that it has a whole lot to do with power and privilege, especially when it comes to the United States, and when it comes to race, when it comes to marginalization.
And I would just add class, like class impacts community as well, and classes judgments or that sort of thing. So.
Okay, so having membership versus being of the community, that is what I usually go around talking about when I speak to groups. And membership has boundaries. So we were just talking about that. That's that right to belong. And it's based on this thing that there are people who belong and people who do not. But if that's the case, then what we would see is that there are just all these different groups, like I'm showing here on the screen, where there's a circle here full of people, a circle over there. Everybody is kind of us versus them in that situation, which is actually how this definition of membership is set up. And with its 5 attributes, think about this in terms of power, where we're saying we didn't necessarily have this as far as the quote unquote Black community, but whiteness does, and how whiteness shapes communities. So emotional safety, where I can't remember any other time that Black people have felt emotionally safe. A sense of belonging and identification, meaning the people in it say, this is my group. A personal investment, but also a common symbol system. And I found that to be something that was also shared among a whole lot of communities. So what I found studying the go-go music cultural community was being of the community, permeable levels. So instead of that hard boundary, My model has a dotted line showing that you can move in and out toward the middle. In the middle, that core is the community, but there's also room for supportive community and also room for everybody else to be potential members of the community. So it's not necessarily all about who belongs, who does not. You cannot belong because you have not earned your right. It is really based on some other things. So this is using the go-go community as the model as it was developed. That core community that you see there, personal knowledge and experience of the culture. Culture is actually at the center of this community model. Recognition, instead of what we saw with membership and them saying, this is my community, the community says, you are one of us. But there's room for that supportive community. And what my participants said in the research, they used the terms, they have love for us, they show love to us. So even though they know this person may not have been born of this community, they love and support us. Those were very key themes. And you need room for that, because if your community is marginalized, such as the go-go music cultural community is a marginalized community, you do need people to love and support you in order to grow your own community power, in order to try to stop from being marginalized. And then the potential community. So in this case, it was people who are unfamiliar with go-go music, people who don't like go-go music, people who have exploited or marginalized, such as politicians, such as journalists, researchers even. But what they said was, all they have to do is love and support us. That automatically makes you a member of the supportive part of the community. You know, just in terms of levels goes, even Dr. Lyrical Tay talked about levels. So this is a way for communities to build their power, also to keep their core, keep their culture, and just acknowledge that through love and support and through showing up. That was another thing that came up in my research. When you show up, people see you, people see what you do. If any of us have ever been in relationships, we know what it's like for somebody to say they love us versus to actually love us, to actually support us. And that's how you know what the community is. With this, I found 4 attributes. So other than the permeable levels, there was that personal knowledge and experience. You know what you're talking about when you're in conversation with people, and people can tell you're part of the community based on how you know what you know. That recognition, you are one of us. And the example that I use with that one that makes people laugh is the difference between Rachel Dolezal and Tina Marie. When I ask people, what's the difference? So I never heard Tina Marie claim to be Black, but I've heard a lot of Black people claim Tina Marie. Even where her fan base is majority Black. White people, I know they just, weren't into it. But Rachel Dolezal kept claiming, this is my group. She used all those attributes of membership. I've earned my right to be in here. I taught Black history. I'm wearing my hair like this. I tan, all these other things to say, I'm one of you. I've earned my right to belong, instead of them saying that you are one of us. And the priorities there are different. So with being of the community, cultural knowledge is a priority, love, support, people telling you that you're one of them. Where membership, it was about belonging. And even though people talk about that, but that earning a right to belong, and the fact that in the United States, we are told that we're shown over and over again that we don't belong. Safety is a priority in membership. Black people aren't safe. That us versus them thing, that's also something we're also told that we're the one, we're the them. The us is the US, we're the them. And also them saying that this is my group. So think of all the other things different other groups had to let go just to be called white in this country. And in terms of sense of community, that definition is about belonging and about a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together. So I want to draw your attention to that. In terms of maybe that's not how we experience sense of community. If we're talking about a so-called Black community, a shared faith that our needs will be met through our commitment to be together. Because even if we have committed to be together, we've still been fighting for hundreds of years with people getting together. We see all over the world now, people in the streets having a commitment to be together, but it's not a shared faith that needs will be met. Just want to ask you if you have any feedback on how you're experiencing the Black community or that concept of a cookout and the differences between membership, those contradictions there, and what it's like to be of the community and feel a sense of community in a completely different way.
Do you mind going back to the slide before the last one where you did the comparison between the two, please?
You're taking us to class now, Dr. 99.
I'm just saying, I really enjoyed speaking with you all, and you know how I am when it comes to y'all.
So again, the question is the difference between our needs being met and...
I wanted to actually get your response to that sense of community, like this definition of a sense of community, that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together, and how that might map onto or just not even resonate with your sense of community, and how you feel it with either the so-called Black community or other communities to which you feel a strong sense of community.
Yeah, I think that when I enter into different community spaces, I'm not always thinking about quote unquote needs, and my needs being met. So like you previously said, being of the community, part of it is just showing up for folks. So sometimes it's imperative that I show up for other folks, besides myself, right? So sense of community definition seems very selfish. I need to make sure that I'm getting something out of it in order for me to show up, right? So it's not always about me, and it shouldn't always be about me if we are being of a community.
Mm-hmm.
And that also being said, there's a difference between needs and wants, and I want to be here because it's a welcoming space, it's a healing space, it's a celebratory space, and those are different, I guess, emotions or energies that as Black folks, it's helpful for us to get through these times, right? So that being said, when I think about being of the community, it's important for me to know that I'm loved, and oftentimes we love folks the best that we can love them, not necessarily how we want to be loved. And it's also that recognition, right, of accepting, like, okay, well, this is how like Dr. Leco said, like, this is how my cousin shows up for me, and I know that he loves me. I may not agree with all that he's saying, but this is how he expresses love, right? And this is how I'm able to express love to him. So I think it's a recognition of the diversity within our humanity, and that we can be all here together, but not in agreement, but still with the mindset of we're in this together because we want to be here versus let me make sure that because I'm investing, I'm getting this output.
And I'm gonna bring it smaller in terms of membership and community, in terms of Black community, even smaller, just in terms of thinking about the family members that you see often, the family members that you are around a lot, where you go up and you feel that sense of belonging. Then there may be some other family members where you still going to the cookout, but you might not necessarily feel that sense of belonging or of the community. It's more of you're in my family, but we don't have that same type of relational situation going on because it's distant. And so there's a different comfort level of how much of me, when you're saying of just showing up, of how much of me will show up. I might be a bit more reserved, and you see a different side of Tay, because it's like I see you, but I don't see you often. So the boundaries, like I don't know necessarily all of your boundaries because we don't interact as much. Your comfort level, that sort of thing. So I don't necessarily feel like there's a sense of belonging for distant relatives the same way of those relatives at the cookout, in which I interact with more, if that answers your question. Did it?
It did, and I'm also really glad you said that, because that brings up another point. So in terms of what we're seeing now with the resistance in demonstrations, this demonstrated resistance, this other narrative is coming in about quote unquote outsiders, either blaming something on outside agitators or other people saying, we heard you say that you're not from here, so you can't become part of this protest. And I'm only speaking about Baltimore. We've all worked in community in Baltimore. Have you heard, what does this mean to you when people say, you're not from here, you can't do this? And Yeah, I saw you shake your head. I don't know if you want to, it just, that comes up a lot. And, when it comes to terms for community, it's just another one of these contradictions.
I was born and raised in Baltimore, and there are some Baltimore folk who, because I now live in the county, who discredit to a certain extent. Like I don't belong in Be More no more. And I said no more. Like I said, born and raised, got a lot of family that still live there. So Be More is my heart. I might be in the county now, but I have a strong allegiance to Be More, right? And so I feel of in all that about Baltimore, but there are people who push me aside and tell me like, right now you're not relevant because you're not here. And I will say that, especially when it comes from family, like that hurt because like, look, dude, you know me, like I'm literally 15 minutes outside of Be More. I'll be there in a minute. But that sense of belonging for them, since I quote unquote chose to live in the county, like Be More can be so territorial about this. Like if you ain't in here, stay out of here, don't worry about it, we got this, right? If you don't live here every day, shut your mouth. And that, I think that can weaken, and this is me, can weaken that sense of belonging for community and can create that some boundaries that don't need to exist, because I still feel quote unquote authentic in my Be More-ness, even though I no longer live in the city. But I could tell you though, Be More can ride real hard for quote unquote outsiders. And even though I'm an insider outsider, as I say about myself, yeah, that can feel like you're being excommunicated from the cookout, in a certain extent. Like you can't take leadership positions, come into Baltimore, shut up, sit back here and help, but don't try to speak on Baltimore right now because you don't live here.
I think to add on to what you said, it also goes on to the protection of that space, right? So if you're not there on a daily basis, should you really be given voice to speak about that space? And I think when we do think about certain communities within Baltimore, or just Baltimore in general, or Baltimore versus the county, and how the image is represented. Like if I tell someone I'm from Baltimore, they're like, oh, you're from Baltimore? Like, ooh, like, you know what I mean? And so it's just like, okay. So it's that image of what Baltimore represents to quote unquote outsiders. But it makes sense why some folks do want to protect that space, because we know some organizations, right, that go into Baltimore City, they do work within a community, but not for the community, right? So it's always that extraction of knowledge, that extraction of resources.
Yeah.
So they're protecting that because they have been disinvested in intentionally, right? So because they know the history of folks coming in who are not a part of this, whether or not they are Black or not, or represent certain organizations, it makes sense why some folks are more protective or territorial, right? Because some folks too in Baltimore County, like, oh, you're not from around here, well, what you doing here, right? So it's that same mindset of having to prove yourself if you're not there enough, right? Or if you're not in close enough proximity, which makes sense. But I do also agree that it can be to our disadvantage because you have certain resources and skill sets and knowledge that you bring to that space that some folks may not have because of other outsiders who have intentionally already taken away those resources, right? So what does it mean for us to come into that space, to come and go and come and vision, and to say, okay, well, Dr. Largote, I know you can do this. Like, we've worked in West Baltimore, for example, with Denise Johnson, with the Womb Works. Like, we know we honor them as elders and we know what they're able to do, right? So we're going to respect that and hold them to that. And so I think it's that recognition of what do I bring to this space and what are our goals and intentions when I think about Baltimore City, or just community building in general.
And Baltimore give you that test too. They be like, where you go to high school?
Yes.
Where you go to middle school? Like when they ask you that, they really trying to figure out how Baltimore are you,
right,
about where you went to high school. And when I tell my high school, they be like, oh yeah, nah.
She's not from around here.
But it's so funny you brought up boundaries, like unnecessary boundaries, also brought up having to prove yourself, and all that we just saw with membership, with groups that have power. So I feel like when Black communities do that, Black people in different cities do that, they're trying to have some kind of sense of power. Like, that's the only way, you know, I can get it now. Everything's been taken. So let me try to put up these boundaries. But my thing is always like, you're using a boundary that was on a map hundreds of years ago when we were the property. So what does this really have to, this is imaginary lines. You're going by their lines, like come into the present. Unless, if we want to set up boundaries, let's talk about boundaries of who's not looting the community. That makes more sense. Not imaginary, you know, put on the map back when people across the ocean was claiming their territory over here that they done stole from somebody else. You're falling into that. But it also doesn't make any sense. And I think when we start trying to put up these boundaries to try to gain power, like, that's understandable. But suppose when they poisoned Flint, Michigan, we all were like, I don't live there, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would you do that? And, you know, I've gone around the country talking to people in different communities who say, this is what's happening here, trying to let anybody know what's happening to them. Native populations, so the First Nations out there, they still going through hell out there. And, you know, a lot of these people in communities will say, people forgot about us, we're forgotten, nobody cares about us. So if nobody cares, you know what I mean? And it's spaces like that. So when you start telling people you can't belong here, you don't do this, you're pushing away, you know, totally understandable for how much advantage people have been taken, you know, has been taken over Black communities or other marginalized communities. But when it comes to this little petty stuff, and it happens with the DC thing too, you know, like with me studying go-go, for as many people, it's like, oh, that's DC's music. It's like half the people, most of it took place in PG County. And the times when I was hanging out in DC, I went to Virginia to get a crew, from Maryland to Virginia to get a crew and then drive into DC. That was how the scene was supported. Like, nobody would have bought your little $9 CD or be one of 20 people coming to see your little whack rap show if it wasn't for people coming from other places. I'm calling people whack. They weren't whack, but you know what I'm saying? So people who trying to make all these boundaries from the imaginary lines that were drawn from people controlling them in oppressing other people, sticking to those boundaries don't make any sense to me.
Sis. You said a word. You said a word. But I hear, and even in, and I'm not going to quote said person because I'm going to try to, you know, cite a sister right now, but even in thinking about power dynamics and what you say, and sometimes how we reinscribe, right, the dominant culture, because that's what we've existed in, but it's a sense of protection. Like, think about even when we used to have beef back in the day, right? Like, I live over here, Pennsylvania Avenue, Robert Street, this was going on, these my streets, you live over there. Like, so that was the thing. We got these streets, you got those streets, this is ours. That sense of ownership that can pervade things. But that was also, I mean, I know that's problematic, but it also make you feel known, right? Because you knew when I walked down Penn Ave and Rob, like, all right, I just got to get there. Because if you're coming from some territory where you got beef with folks, like, I just got to get to my block. When you get to your block, you're like, what? Right? Because you feel that sense of belonging again. Like, right here, this is where our community, you know, takes up. So I definitely hear how it's problematic, but I also hear how just to want to own something, because the concept of ownership has been so ingrained in you. So I feel that it's like balancing those two. It's a struggle, you know?
I agree with that. If we look at Black wealth in the US, we don't own as we should, right? Even though white wealth would not exist.
Because we couldn't.
Right, exactly. So white wealth would not exist without the enslavement of Black folks and the genocide of Native folks, right? So if we look at present day and our sense of wanting to have ownership and to have property and power, it's just another re-articulation of us wanting to be human, right? And it's not necessarily a great thing that we have to adopt these mindset that has not served us historically and still do not serve us. But what you said, Dr. 99, about these lines and these boundaries, like, they exist, right? We know with the redlining of Baltimore City, we know in certain neighborhoods how it's gated off in Baltimore City. So these boundaries, like, they're physical and actual boundaries that tell you, like, if you don't have money, if your skin ain't light, you don't belong here, right? So that being said, I would say that these boundaries that were created centuries ago, they still do exist. And so it's difficult for us, I would argue, as Black folks, to not combat those boundaries if we don't really, one, understand that it's there, if we're trying to act like it's not there, or if we don't have a common vision that we want to dismantle these boundaries, or for some of us who want to maintain these boundaries, like, what does that mean? Because as we said, we do have friction, we do have diversity of thought, right? So if the majority of us do not want these boundaries, what does that mean for the Black community in the United States? And as you stated, when we think about the uprising, how Black folks are criminalized within the news media, right? But they're not talking about the mom and pops who come out and sweep the streets, and the kids who are still playing, and the maintaining of these mom and pops dynamics within our neighborhoods. They're saying, oh, well, look at these looters, these rioters, these et cetera. They're not looking at the fact that we're always trying to maintain a sense of community within our own spaces. So that's my response in regards to boundaries and the protection of that space. I think because generally we don't have land. Let's just be honest, as Black folks, we don't have land within the US. The Native population, their land was stolen and continues to be stolen. We don't honor land as a sacred space in general. When we think about property and ownership, like, what does it mean to be a human and earn the earth, right? Like, let's be honest, like, what does that say about us? So if we can't even, like, break down those concepts within our quote unquote American Constitution that's not applied equally to all of us, then it's like, can we really get to representative democracy? Can we get to a new form of leadership? I would argue we cannot.
All these things, what is it like? What do you say? What is it like to be human and earn the earth? Like that, I mean, but like I said, holding on to those other imaginary boundaries that other people placed, really in order to control us and have power over us. I would like to have more conversations with Black people who are in different localities to see how can we build community across these imaginary ass boundaries that's on a map that you wouldn't know unless somebody pointed this out to you, unless, like you say, you live in a red line community and we can see, oh, I see where the good places start versus where I see where all the liquor stores are versus, all this other stuff. So there are different things that we can see, but in trying to build our own power, how can we rise up and spread out and see, okay, how are we working together? And maybe what's happening right now, all these demonstrations of resistance, hopefully that can do that. And unfortunately, a little outside agitator narrative keeps getting shoved in there. And I think that's, of course, another way to divide and conquer, even though some other people did come in and, we heard that from people themselves that,
yes.
When outside, I mean people who were not part of the demonstration, just trying to cause trouble. So that's a different story. But I'm just in terms of people saying, if we're united in struggle, let's be united in struggle, and not somebody to say, you're not from here.
Yeah, but I don't know. Dr. Cupid from way over east, and you know what I'm saying? Us on the west side, we done had some things not this way.
I'm
that
just
used
saying,
to be.
Yeah, let me go somewhere and tell somebody, oh, I'm not from Baltimore, I'm from Woodlawn. How dumb would I sound? So
nah, but you know what I'm saying? Like we from over west, she from over east. So we just gotta, you know what I'm saying? We gotta talk about some things.
Mm-hmm. Rise up and above, Dr. Lyrical Tay. So do we have anything else to wrap up this conversation before we get to affirmations?
I would say in regards to creating more Black community, we definitely do need to be more intentional about creating Black wealth, generational wealth. And I think we do that by being more intentional about having collective economics. I think during this times when we see that the top 1% got richer and us poor folks and middle class folks got poor, I think more Black folks have been more aware of the need to invest in Black businesses or invest in co-ops and invest in businesses that have a social justice and equality or equity mindset. So I would say that's something, if we do want to build community, we know, unfortunately, we do live in a capitalist society. So until we can imagine and get to that other imagined space, we have to learn how to exist within this space while also dismantling the space at the same time. So I would argue that we need to be more intentional about how we're spending our monies, where we're donating to, as well, how we not only donate in our money, but our time. So do we need to barter more in these times and after these times? Because we know that Black women will be more negatively impacted by this, and particularly Black mothers, right? So when we think about the pandemic, how can we be mindful about the Black mothers, whether or not they're single or not, within our communities? So we're helping to uplift our entire Black community. Because once, the Black woman is uplifted, all of us become uplifted. Let's just be honest about how we're set up within the Black community.
And I just definitely want to shout out the Black businesses, the Black co-ops that do exist, the on-the-ground Black organizations that are out there every day, right now, and have been when the camera's here, when the camera's gone. I just want to say thank you. We see you. We see you serving the community. We see you advocate for the community. And we see you during the pandemic and before the pandemic. And that type of consistency, when the pandemics happen, when the emergency happened, that allows Black people to say, they've been here, we know them, there's presence, right? There's representation, there's love and acceptance, so people know where to go. So to those of you who've been doing that, I say thank you, like all the way from the county. But no, but for real, I say thank you because it's so needed. And knowing where to go in times of danger, in times of struggle, is such an essential resource. So thank you.
And I also want to big up, you brought up Black Buying Power. Dr. Jared Ball's book just came out, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, getting all into Black economics and how a lot of times that the idea of Black buying power is used to further stereotype us and oppress us. So I want to lift that up, but also just want to give thanks to everybody who got in the street and put themselves out there and did so much over the past couple of days, all the things they have been doing and will continue to do just to demonstrate the resistance for us. All right, and it is time for affirmations. Got your affirmations ready? All right, I think Dr. Lyrical Tay, you're up first.
It is time for parents to teach young people early on that there is diversity and beauty in their strength. We all know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of that tapestry are equal in value. The diversity of our Blackness, the diversity of our communities, all important. Dr. Maya Angelou.
We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Gwendolyn Brooks.
If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Lilla Watson, Aboriginal artist, activist, and academic.
So we want to take a moment to say the names of our Black community members who we have lost in regards to police brutality and white supremacy. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Sean Reed, and Tony McDade. And to all of our brothers, our sisters, and those in the gender non-binary who we have lost, the names that we know and we do not know, we honor you in this moment and your loved ones. May you rest in peace, may you rest in power, and may our movement for humanity continue. Thank you.
Amen, thank you. Everyone, thank you so much for exhaling with us this week. Please join the conversation on social media, share this with your friends, and use the hashtag SistaDocsExhale. Follow us on Twitter at SistaDocsExhale. You can also catch us on Facebook and respond to the YouTube video. Until next time, we wish you, sisters, say it with me, love, light, and inside. Peace, everyone.